Hello, we continue our lecture with the chapter 5 CPU scheduling. So, in the previous lecture, we know that in a multi-program system, to maximize the CPU utilization, the system keeps some processes in the memory, and at an instant, there are one or many processes running to avoid the CPU being free. In a simple manner, we assume that we have a system with a single CPU core. Only one process can run at a time. Other processes must be waited. So in a system with a single CPU core, only one process can run at a time. Others must wait until the CPU core is free and can be rescheduled. A process is executed until it must wait. For example, waiting for the completion of some I/O request. In a simple computer system, the CPU then just sits idle. The CPU is free. At that time, the operating system takes the CPU away from that process and gives the CPU to another process that is currently kept in the memory and in the ready state. And on a multi-core system, the operating system dispatches many processes to many CPU cores to ensure that the CPU is almost always busy. For example, if we have two cores, we will have two processes running on these two cores at a time. So, this kind of task is the idea of the CPU scheduling. The operating system chooses processes being in the ready state to dispatch the CPU cores to allow the processes running. In a single-core system, the CPU scheduler chooses one process among processes in the ready queue to allocate the CPU core for running. And the CPU scheduling is a fundamental operating system function. So, what are objectives of today? So we will describe various CPU scheduling algorithms. In this chapter, we discuss and try to understand the basic concept of the CPU scheduling. Some scheduling criteria such as the waiting time, the response time, the turnaround time, and so on. We also study some basic scheduling algorithms such as first come, first serve, sort the job first, round robin, thread scheduling, or process scheduling. We know that a kernel thread is recognized by the operating system, so that the kernel thread is also scheduled by the operating system. To take it easy, for understand the example in our lecture or doing the exercise, normally we will assume that the algorithm apply for processes running on a single core. But in the reality, we can also use the algorithms on a multiprocessor system which have many CPU cores. In addition, in this short video, we briefly refer to the real-time CPU scheduling. Some real operating systems such as Windows and Linux operating system. To evaluate algorithm, we will base on some scheduling criteria to do this. And the last objective of this chapter is to design a program that implements several different CPU scheduling algorithms. So, this is the task you will be required to do in the assignment too. First, when a process executes, so it will have CPU burst and I/O burst. So the CPU burst, that means the process execute with the CPU. I/O burst, so this process wait for I/O task. The process begin with a CPU burst followed by an I/O burst and then followed by CPU burst, I/O burst, and the last, this process will end with the CPU burst. So we had two definitions about the type of process. We have CPU bound process and I/O bound process. A CPU bound process is mean that this process spend more time for execution than spending time for I/O waiting. I/O bound process. A process spend less time for execution than spend the time for waiting I/O. Okay, so you see here, CPU bound process will have sometimes CPU bound process will have long burst time of CPU, and I/O bound process, of course, that I/O bound process will have long time for I/O burst. So here we have the histogram of the CPU burst time. As you see here in the histogram, the data illustrate that we have the large number of the short burst CPU time and a small number of long burst time. So an I/O bound process typically has many short CPU bursts, and a CPU bound process might have a few long CPU bursts. You have to emphasize this description because the distribution of CPU bursts can be important when implementing a CPU scheduling algorithm. For example, some algorithms privilege to I/O bound process such as the sorted job first, the sorted remaining time first, and otherwise the round robin algorithm will privilege for the process obtain the CPU bound. CPU scheduler. So the CPU scheduler selects one process from among the processes in the real queue and allocate the CPU core to it. In this line, you see here two words, non-preemptive and preemptive. So what is non-preemptive and what is preemptive scheduling? The CPU scheduling decision may take place when a process switches from running to waiting state, switches from running to ready state, and switches from waiting to ready or terminates. So you remember the model of changing state? We have five states of a process: new, ready, running, waiting or block, and terminating. Okay, so when we say non-preemptive scheduling, it means that in a non-preemptive scheduling, once the CPU has been allocated to a process, the process will keep the CPU until it releases by terminating or by switching to the waiting state, asking for I/O. Okay, and in a preemptive scheduling, a running process can be preempted by another process. It means that while a process is running, another process comes and takes away the CPU to execute. This mode of scheduling will cause some problem in the synchronization, can result in the race condition. This we will discuss more in detail in the chapter of the synchronization. So we have some problem. For example, here, the data. If we have many processes access to the same data, and one process preempt another process, and unfortunately, so if this process is writing, okay, another process come and read data. So this data may be inconsistent, maybe in inconsistent state. Another problem, for example, a process is in the kernel mode. For example, execute the system call. Another process coming and preempt, so it will affect to the kernel mode activity of the process. The same problem with the interrupt. You know that if one process is running, an interrupt occurs, so the CPU will be taken away to execute the interrupts. So it will lose the input or output of the process. Okay. So when you use the preemptive scheduling, you must be careful. Must consider these three problems. For example, the first problem, consider access to the same data. The second, consider preemption while in kernel mode. And the third, you must consider interrupts occurring during crucial OS activity. Okay. So return to the scheduling. So if you say non-preemptive scheduling, as I see, non-preemptive means that when a process is allocated the CPU, it will keep this CPU until it terminate or it release for I/O task, for example. So the numero 1 and the numero 4 belongs to the non-preemptive scheduling, and the number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4, these four cases, okay, belong to the preemptive scheduling. Okay, now you know that the CPU scheduler will select one process among processes in the ready queue to allocate the CPU for executing. But who is responsible to do this task? The dispatcher. Okay, the dispatcher gives control of the CPU to the process selected by the short-term scheduler. Here the short-term scheduler is the CPU scheduler. When we say the short-term scheduler, because the burst time of the CPU is very short. So the dispatcher involves some activity such as switching contexts between two processes. So switching to user mode and jumping to the proper location in the user program to resume that program. And you see here, for example, the B0 is executing. And now the CPU scheduler select B1 for the next time to execute. So first, we must stop, pause the B0, and we must carry out a context switch. So this is the task of the dispatcher. The dispatcher will save state of the B0 into BCB0 and restore states of the B1 from BCB1. BCB here is the process control block. So the dispatch latency here is the time it takes for the dispatcher to stop one process B0, for example, and start another process B1 for that B1 can execute. And the time from here to here we call dispatch latency. And you remember that the dispatch latency we will consider the dispatch latency as the overhead of the operating system. We don't count the dispatch latency as the overhead of a process. Okay. So here we have some scheduling criteria. Because after we will study some scheduling algorithm, and to evaluate the scheduling algorithm, we must base on the scheduling criteria. First, the CPU utilization. It means that we want to keep the CPU as busy as possible. Normally, if we can keep the CPU busy at 80%, it's almost very good. The throughput is the number of processes that complete their execution per time unit. For example, we will count how many processes complete in 1 minute. Turnaround time. This is the amount of time to execute a particular process from the beginning to the end. The waiting time is the amount of time a process spends waiting in the early queue. Okay, you must pay attention here. The waiting time, that's the time that a process is in the early queue waiting for CPU. Okay, the response time is different. The response time, the amount of time it takes from when a request was submitted until the first response is produced. Okay, so after when you want to make it clear about the difference between the waiting time and response time, you will do some exercise to understand it. So here we have five basic scheduling criteria: CPU utilization, throughput, turnaround time, waiting time, response time. So can you answer me? So you want to maximize or minimize the CPU utilization. You want to maximize or minimize the throughput. Turnaround time, maximize or minimize, waiting time, and response time. So, of course, that we want to maximize the CPU utilization. Because maximize the CPU utilization, this is the objective of an operating system. Keep the CPU busy as much as possible. Okay, the throughput, maximize. We want to minimize the turnaround time. We want to minimize the waiting time, And we also want to minimize the response time. So you see here, if the criteria refers to the time, we want to minimize, okay? So in most cases, it's necessary to optimize the average measure. For example, optimize the average waiting time, optimize the average response time. When you say average measure, it means that you count, for example, the turnaround time. So you count the sum of the turnaround time of a number of processes and divide it by the number of processes. So you have the average. And for interactive system in a PC desktop or laptop system. So it's more important to minimize the variance in the response time. It's called in the interactive system. The response time is the most important element for measuring the performance of a system. Okay, so what's an interactive system? An interactive system, for example, you have the game. Okay, so you have many interaction between the user and the system. Okay, so in interactive system, you will almost have some small CPU burst time. So for the next slide, we will study some algorithm. So to take easy to understand our algorithm, we will assume that we will run our processes in a single CPU core. Okay, and the measure of comparison we will use the average waiting time. So first, here we have the first come first serve. The idea of the algorithm as a FIFO, first in first out. Here, for example, we have three processes B1, B2, and B3, and this is the CPU burst time. Okay, so it means that the B1 will have the burst time of 24 milliseconds for execution. The B2 will need 3 milliseconds for execution. And the Gantt chart for the schedule. The Gantt chart will illustrate the time from beginning and the end of the process. For example, the B1 will begin at 0 and end at 24 because this process needs 24 milliseconds for execution. So the B2 and B3 must wait for the B1 at the end of the B1. Okay, so the B2 begins and execute during 3 milliseconds. After that, the B3 run. So the waiting time for B1 is 0. Okay, the B1 does not wait. The B2 is 24. The waiting time of the B2 is 24 because the B2 must wait for the B1. Okay, and the B3 must wait for B1, B2. So the waiting time of the B3 is 27. The average waiting time is 70. Okay, so if we have the FCMS scheduling, sometimes we will have the convoy effect. It means that short processes behind a long process, and all the other processes wait for the one big process to get up the CPU. For example, here we have a big process, a long process B1, 24 milliseconds. These two short processes must wait too long for the process B1. So it's a convoy effect of the algorithm first come first serve. If we change the order, B2 first, and then B3, and then B1. So the average waiting time now is only 3, much better than reverse case. Okay, that's explained for the convoy effect. So here we also have another process, another scheduling algorithm, sorted job first scheduling. The motivation, okay, moving a short process before a long one decrease the waiting time of the short process more than it increase the waiting time of a long process. So you see here, for example, if we arrange the processes in this order, B2, B3, and B1, the average waiting time here is only 3. But if we keep in this order, we will have the average waiting time is 17. So that's why we say if we let the short processes running first, we will decrease the waiting time. So that's the idea of the sorted job first scheduling. We will let the short process running before a long one, and this will decrease the waiting time. Okay, so when the CPU is available, the HGF algorithm will assign to the process that has the smallest next CPU burst. Okay, so that's why we say HGF is optimal because it will give minimum average waiting time for a given set of processes. But the problem is how you can determine the length of the next CPU request. You do not know this information. You just know the current bus time. You do not know the next bus time. So to know this, you must predict. Okay. Here we have an example. For example, here we will let the CPU for B4 first because it's smallest. Okay, it's smallest. And the next one is B1, and the next is B3, and the last one is B2. Okay, voilà. To determine length of the next CPU burst for SGF, we can use this formula. Tau n plus 1. Okay, tau n, it means that the predicted value for the next CPU burst, the predicted value, and the Tn, the actual length of n CPU burst. Okay, and alpha here is the coefficient. If the alpha is close to 0, it means that the importance of the predicted values is based on only the reverse predicted value. And if the alpha is close to 1, it means that the predicted value is based on the real value, not considered to the predicted of the reverse time. Okay. Commonly, the alpha is set to a half. Okay. And the SGF is the non-preemptive scheduling. It means that when the process running, okay, it will keep the CPU until it terminates or it release the CPU by asking the IO task. So we will have another version of the sorted job first called sorted remaining time first. So this here in the histogram here, we will have two lines. The dark one and the blue one. The dark ones is the real value and the blue ones is the predicted value by using the reverse formula. Okay, you see here the predicted value is initialized to 10. So, but D2 curve, okay, is close at the end of the time. Okay, if you have a value, if you have the predicted value here, it means that okay, the predicted value is run. Good job. In the Celtic remaining time fast and rhythm, the motivation is the same as the Celtic jump fast, but this is the version of preemptive scheduling. And here, to illustrate this, use here this the arrival time. That is the time that the process appear in the ready queue. Okay, so at 0, there is only B1 in the ready queue. The B2 appears in the real queue at 1. The B3 appears in the real queue at 2. And the B4 appears in the real queue at 3. So at 0, we have only one process B1. So this process will run first. Okay. At 1, we will have another process called B2. Okay. So at that time, we will compare the two processes B1 and B2. The remaining time of B1 is 7, okay? And the remaining time of B2 is 4. 4 is smaller than 7. So the B1 will be preempted by B2. The B1 will be paused and the CPU will be taken away from B1 and allocate the CPU to B2. Okay. The idea you is to minimize the waiting time of the sort processes, such as the sorted job first. But the average waiting time of the sorted remaining time first is better than the average waiting time of the sorted job first. The round robin scheduling. Okay, the round robin scheduling is commonly used in the uh, interactive system. So motivation. Each process just gets a small unit of CPU time. Sometimes we call time quantum. Okay, usually 10 or 100 milliseconds. So after this time has elapsed, the process is preempted and added to the end of the real queue. So, for example here, if the quantum time is 4, the big one needs 24 milliseconds for execution. But first, the big one is allocated only 4 milliseconds to execute for the first time. At 4, if the big one is not yet finished, okay? So the B1 will return to the end of the ready queue and wait for the next burst time. So the CPU now switches to the B2 for the next 4 milliseconds, but the B2 only need 3 milliseconds. So the B2 finishes at 7 and then switch to the B3. The B3 needs only 3 milliseconds. So the B3 finish at 10 and release the CPU. And now the CPU is allocated to the B1, and the B1 uses another quantum time from 10 to 14. The next quantum time from 14 to 18 until finishing. Okay, so this algorithm is suitable for the interactive system, but the problem is it will increase the average turnaround time. See, you see here, typically higher average turnaround time than HGF, but better response. Okay, as I say in the reverse line that the interactive system consider the response time is the most element of the scheduling criteria. So the round robin is commonly used in the operating system of the interactive system. We have two marks here, two notes. If the quantum time is large, the round robin will become the FIFO scheduling. If the quantum time is small, okay, so it will cause a large number of context switch, and this will increase the overhead of the system. Okay, so here, for example, if we have quantum time of 6, we have only one context switch. If we have the quantum time is 1, so we have 9 context switch. It will increase the overhead of our system. The priority scheduling, it will based on the priority, a priority number integer of a process. Each process will be associated with a priority number. So the CPU is allocated to the process with the highest priority. Equal priority processes are scheduled in FCFS or round robin. Okay. With the priority scheduling, we have two modes of decision: preemptive or non-preemptive. So the problem of priority scheduling, we will have the problem of starvation. Starvation is mean that a process wait but do not know when it will be allocated the CPU. Okay, so when we use the priority scheduling, we will have the problem of starvation. The low priority processes may never execute. It must wait for the highest priority finish first. Okay, so for priority scheduling, we will have the solution called aging. A-type process. We will increase the priority of the process. So the starvation is also occurs in the sorted job first and the sorted remaining time first. Because in these two processes, in these two scheduling algorithms, we privilege for the small burst time first. So it will cause that the long CPU burst time process wait for the small burst time process, and it will cause the starvation. Okay, the long time process will wait for the small burst time process. Here we have the example of priority scheduling. So you see here, the first one is B2. It's called in this table, the B2 is the highest priority. Okay, the smallest number will give you the highest priority. Sometimes we can use the combination of the priority scheduling with the round robin. For example, here we run the process with the highest priority first. But if we have two processes, for example B2 and B3 with the same priority, so at that time we can run round robin. Okay. Multi-level queue. In a system, we can combine many algorithms. For example, we can use first come first serve and round robin in our system and priority, for example. So here we have n queue of priority. Okay, the first one is the highest priority, the second, the next, and the next. So multi-level queue, it means that in our system we have many level, something like that, and the highest one will run first. For example, T0 and T1, T3, T3, T4 here will run first. Okay, the processes in the queue of the priority one is run if and only if there is no process here. Okay, the same if one process in this queue run, it means that there is no process in the priority of 0 and no process in the priority of 1. Okay, so for example here we have the real-time processes with the highest priority, and the system processes, and the interactive processes, and the last one the batch processes. And if the process is in the real-time processes, it will be allocated the CPU for running time for running first. After that, if there is no process in the real-time processes, the process in the system processes will run. And if there is no processes in the real-time processes, no process in the system processes here, so the process in the interactive processes will run. Okay. The problem of the multi-level queue is that one process cannot change the position, cannot change from one queue to another queue. So it will create the starvation problem. Okay, so that's why we have multi-level feedback queue. One process can move from one queue to another queue. But the problem is that in the multi-level feedback queue scheduler, you must consider some parameter for defining the number of queues, the scheduling algorithm for each queue, the method, etc. And this scheme leaves the IO bound and interactive processes in the higher priority queue, and a process that waits too long in a lower priority may be moved to a higher priority queue. It means that if a process waits too long, you can move this process to a queue that have a higher priority to decrease the starvation problem. Here we have an example of the multi-level feedback queue. A process will enter by the process will begin with the Q0 first, and then Q1, and then Q2. Each queue we will have a proper algorithm. For example, here we use round robin with the quantum time 8 milliseconds. Okay, the Q1 round robin with the time quantum 16 milliseconds, and the last one we will use the FCFS. So it means that when one process enter our system, okay, so it will enter the Q0 first, and it will execute here with 8 milliseconds. After that, if the process is not yet finished, the process will be moved to the next Q1. Okay, and the process execute here with the 16 milliseconds. After that, if the process is not yet finished, okay, so the process will be moved to the last one, FCFS, and execute here until finishing. Okay, and the priority Q0 is the highest priority Q, and the next one is Q1, and finally the last is the FCFS queue. Okay. The task scheduling, you see, normally we say about the process scheduling, but if we use the kernel thread, so we can consider that here we have the thread scheduling. The distinction between the user level and kernel level threads. You know that this user level is not recognized by the OS, okay, by the operating system. So the user level threads is not scheduled by the operating system, but the kernel level threads will be recognized by the operating system, and the operating system will schedule, okay, will allocate the CPU to the kernel level thread. So when threads supported by the physical structure, the thread schedule not processes. It means that at that time the operating system schedule the thread. Consider a process single-threaded as a thread. Okay, so many to one and many to many models of the thread. In this system, we have the lightweight process. The lightweight process is essentially a virtual processor between the user thread and the kernel thread. This processor is used to execute code and calls, system call. They communicate between the user and kernel level. Okay, so the lightweight process is a data structure, and is considered as the virtual processor. Each lightweight process is attached to a kernel thread, and is a kernel thread that the operating system scheduled to run on a physical processor. If a kernel thread blocks, okay, the lightweight process blocks as well. Okay, an application may require any number of lightweight processes to run efficiently. For example, an application requires 5 lightweight processes. Okay, and this demand can be satisfied by the operating system. But in some cases, for example, if we have only 4 lightweight processes, but an application needs 5 lightweight processes, so then the feed requests much weight for one of the lightweight process returned from the kernel. It means that the system will create a fixed number of lightweight process. For example, 4 lightweight process. If you ask more than this number, you must wait. Here you see something about the process contention scope and the system contention scope is referred to the execution of the time of execution. For example, in the process contention scope, the competition of the CPU takes place among threads belonging to the same process. Okay, and when you say the system contention scope, it means that the competition for the CPU take place among threads in the system. Okay, on threads in the system, not on threads in the same process as the process contention scope. The multiprocessor scheduling. When you have a system of multiprocessor, you have multi-core of CPU and you have multi-threaded cores. You can also apply this algorithm in the system. So we have two possible strategies. For example, you have only a common read queue, for example, something like that, and you will use the algorithm to allocate the CPU core to these processes, or you will have private queue for each core. Okay. Here we have an example of multi-threaded multi-core system. This you will study more in detail in the full slide or in the book. The real-time CPU scheduling. We will have two types, the soft real-time and the hard real-time system. Okay, the soft real-time is mean that we don't have guarantee when tasks will be scheduled. But in the hard real-time system, the task must be serviced by its deadline, the hard deadline. Okay. You will have some example of the POSIX real-time scheduling with the library POSIX. Okay. Here we have some example of Linux scheduling and Windows scheduling. For example, the Linux scheduling. We have two priority ranges, the time sharing and the real time. The Linux scheduling uses the preemptive priority scheduling. So the real time range from 0 to 99. It means that we have 100 queue. Okay, and a nice value from 100 to 140. So the higher priority get larger queue. Okay. Or in the Windows scheduling. In the Windows scheduling, we also use priority schema, highest priority thread. Okay. So if you see in the task manager, of the Windows operating system, you will see a table of some level from the real time and then high and then normal and so on low is the last one. So here we have 22 level priority schema in the Windows scheduling. To evaluate algorithm, you can use some criteria. Okay, for example, response time, the waiting time, or the turnaround time. You can use the simulation to make some scenario and we will have some processes with the fixed birth time, and we let the processes run with the determined algorithm, and then we use the criteria to evaluate the algorithm. For example here, if you use the FCFS for the processes, so it will have 28 milliseconds. The HGF is 13 and the round robin is 23 milliseconds. So in this scenario, we see here HGF is the best, okay, which the criteria average waiting time. The queuing model. The queuing model so describe the arrival of processes. Okay, so in it's referred to the type of the algorithm that we use in the scheduling. For example, if we use FCFS, so the queues is just FIFO. Okay, if we use for the for the SGF, so the queue now is the sorted bus time. It is sorted bus time, the same as the sorted remaining time. Priority scheduling, we will use the priority, the number of priority to make the order of the queue, the ready queue. Okay, and you must pay attention when you use the preemptive scheduling model. Because when a process is running, another process comes, you must compare the two processes. Okay, if the new process has higher priority, so this process will preempt the CPU from the current process. Okay, or if the new process has a smaller CPU burst, it will preempt the current process if you use the sorted remaining time first. Okay, if you use the round robin, okay, you must pay attention of the time a process return to the queue and the time that a new process come in the real queue. Okay, you will um, you will make it clear when you do some exercise about the round robin. Okay, so now we finish our video for the CPU scheduling. If you have any question, okay, uh, contact me at my email and we will discuss about it. Okay.